Men, we're going to go ahead and continue on in the 16th book of Yisrayl, entitled The Sea of Glass. We're on chapter 3. The title is Civil Rights. The people have no right to teach righteousness in the public schools. And of course, we know that that's something that's even taken place in a large degree in the United States, where there is freedom of speech, and of course there's the separation of church and state. Okay, now this sermon was given on the second Roman month, the 6th day of the month in 2016. Pastor, of course, always greets everybody with a shalom. And in verse 2, you'll see the news is great. I think it's going to get really great when the kingdom of Yahweh takes over. Right now, I'm trying to get the world to understand that Yahweh is not weak like Satan. And the thing that we want to pay close attention to here is that Pastor says he's allowing Satan and her agency to go their own way, and he's already warned what that way will bring. And I think everyone here knows the agency being the Roman Catholic Church, who is the one that's the instrument in bringing forth God worship, bringing forth the way of Cain. And like Pastor says here, he's already warned mankind, in this way, that if we follow the laws of Yahweh, well, then we'll receive the blessings. And of course, if we turn away from the laws of Yahweh and follow the ways of the gods, well then, of course, evil will take place, and of course that brings death, misery, and destruction. Okay, let's continue reading in that verse. Pastor says, he's already set a time, and of course, speaking of Yahweh, he's the one who set the time for the revelation of this thing where Yeshua, working through his last days house, which is this work that has been reestablished in the last days all through prophecy, will reveal all of this to the world, which we're doing right now. In the last days, I'll establish my house, and Yeshua is the high priest. And we know that this is the great work that we're all striving to be a part of, the work of the branch and Yeshua together in these last days, bringing forth the reestablishment of the great house of Yahweh, to teach the world righteousness while the world is entangled totally in sin. Okay, let's go over to the next page. In verse 7, Pastor says, I want you to know what you're seeing in today's news, that Yahweh has planned. He gives to the lawgivers, which he plainly tells you who they are in Genesis 49. He tells you that early in Genesis 49 who the lawgivers are for this time period. And of course, this is the descendants of the tribe of Yada. Okay, and then throughout the Holy Scriptures, he, Yahweh, guides us, and shows you where they are, what they're doing, and what they're going to do in advance. And that's one of the commissions of the great house of Yahweh, is that we do bring forth this great teaching of Yahweh in advance. And in advance, I know we could ask any of the boys here, in advance would be prophecy. It's the prophetic word, yes, the prophetic word and everything that is being brought forth through the teachings of the great house of Yahweh, which no other religion, no other work, if you want to call it that, any of Satan's works, are bringing about. This is how we know this is Yahweh's work. Okay? Now he goes forth and starting to reveal the other work. In verse 8, Pastor says, but right now he shows they're on the 7 hills of Rome, beyond Babylon, beyond Damascus, as Yahweh's prophet said. Then Stephen said, beyond Babylon. Stephen knew what he was talking about there, and he used those words deliberately, inspiringly. He was inspired to use the word Babylon. But beyond Damascus, you can see what's occurring to Damascus right now in the news. Don't think that any of this is being done by accident. And for those, especially those of us that, have been here for quite some time, we've seen that prophecy, through what is taking place now in Syria, which, if you've been paying attention to the news isn't really bringing up a lot of what's going on in Syria. There's nothing but death and war that is taking place there every day. Now, I don't know if everyone has seen in the news today, North Korea once again shot a intercontinental missile. And of course, this is not only a distraction, but it's also a provocation, to give the United States and those others that actually enforce democracy in one way or another and follow the Catholic Church and the teachings of the Catholic Church, something to bring attention to. And of course, our attention is focused on getting this word out, not only to North Korea, but to all nations, to show Yahweh's will and Yahweh's plan is that all would come to the knowledge of the laws and the prophecies and be able to be righteous and have life and not death, as we see in the world today with war and destruction. Okay, continuing on, Pastor says, turn with me to Revelation 6. The disease epidemics that you see right now, if you just think, these scientists have been working for years on this. The Vatican had the best team of them in Germany, and they had live people to work with and work on. And we know that was a lot of the things that was taking place under the Hitler regime, all being orchestrated by the Catholic Church, where they actually did experiment. And of course, the world thinks that they were experimenting not in a way of bringing forth sickness and disease, but actually just to bring forth a different type of breeding, which they were working on that, but the whole thing was to actually bring forth sickness and disease and epidemics that are actually tenfold today. Okay, continuing on there, Pastor says, let's see here, the Vatican had the best team of them in Germany, and they had live people to work with and work on. They created diseases. They pretended they were hunting cures, but they created diseases. They knew how to create diseases. This had been done through the actions of illegal lust. So they could create these in test tubes, or they could take the blood from people, which they did, and they could mix with that blood. The abominable things are in their blood. Remember Isaiah 65. So they can create cancer, they can create Zika virus, and we've seen that Zika virus is one of these last abominations that have been brought forth by mankind. And, everybody thinks that it's just some type of different disease that is now being carried by the mosquitoes. Okay, but we know and understand these things are being brought forth. Okay, this is the latest that's getting the world's attention. Okay, now let's go over to verse 13. In verse 13, Pastor says, now the Pope just put out an article that the Jews don't need Yeshua for salvation. Now, also, let's keep in mind the title. And I'll read it once again. Civil rights, the people have no right to teach righteousness in the public schools. Okay, now Pastor says, now the Pope just put out an article that the Jews don't need Yeshua for salvation. Yeah, he said that before. He said who you need is Mary. Okay, and we know, and we have shown and revealed, in the Holy Scriptures that Mary was not meant to be worshipped in any way, shape, or form. Okay, this is all a part of Christianity. It's not actually Mary, the mother of Yeshua, that they're worshiping, but the Queen of Heaven. Okay, he's talking about Isis. So Pastor goes on and explains this further. He's talking about Isis, the same one who gave the sword to Constantine, saying, by this you shall conquer. You haven't been able to conquer this other way, but use this and you'll conquer, and use it big time. And of course, that's the way of war. That's what's brought on by hatred, lust, the things that are brought forth, and going out and taking control and actually taking wealth from other countries. Okay? You haven't, okay, I'm sorry, next sentence. Go out conquering all our enemies. Promote the Lord, as Daniel 11:31 said. Get rid of that temple. Get rid of Yahweh. Get rid of those man-made weak rules, as the Pope is calling them now. We'll read that in a little bit if we get time to do so. Now, Pastor covered a lot in this sermon. He did talk about, I was trying to find, okay, the prophecies for the Middle East and the Gulf War. You know, a series that he had, you know, revealing how mankind, all being orchestrated again by the Catholic Church, would bring forth this sickness, disease, hatred, and lust in that area in and around the great river Euphrates. And 33, it shows with sword and with hunger. Okay, so we know that it's not only war, but it's actually the diseases and the epidemics that take place through famine. Okay, now he's going to go ahead and show this work here of what is taking place today, where the branch, which is our beloved pastor, and Yeshua are revealing these things through prophecy. So pastor goes on in verse 14, he says, but here's the Lamb now opening the seals. Opening what seals? Well, you've got to know in Daniel 12 that Yahweh says there's going to be a time, all of this is going to be sealed up, but there will be a time when they'll be shown. And he says it will be in the last days. And then Yeshua said the last days are this generation, the generation of the nuclear bomb. Keep that in mind in Matthew 24:29. And we know also in Genesis 49, you know, we can see where it talks about all of these things taking place in the last days, including the work of the branch and pastor. So keep that in mind, Matthew 24:29, the nuclear bomb that can darken the sun, mass destruction. These are bombs of mass destruction, of course. And not only it's the actual bomb and the devastation that can take place from these bombs, but what is it also doing? It places fear within their enemies, you know, which is anybody that won't follow the Catholic Church. Okay, so going on in verse 15, do you remember when they started? In 1934. I brought it out how many times, so you better start remembering this stuff. 1934, the computer, the increase of knowledge. What year was that? When that started? 19 and what? Boys? 34. 1934. At this time now, Yahweh prophesied through Daniel. Daniel said, I see two others, speaking of the two witnesses, down there on a future day teaching. That was the last thing that Yahweh showed Daniel. And Daniel got to talk to one of them who was born in 1934. And we know that this has all been revealed, you know, by Pastor, where it was their job, you know, to actually record it for us to be able to teach it in these last days. But they actually seen this work and actually seen our great pastor and overseer. Okay? And that one was teaching on a future day, speaking of pastor. Okay, not the day Daniel was in, but a future day, revealing what was behind these seals that were all sealed up. The one was teaching it. And again, our great pastor and overseer. Now drop down to verse 17. Pastor says, this should make more sense to you if you don't understand it yet. Revelation 4:6 shows four living ones they're full of eyes. And of course, speaking of the quartet that Pastor has brought forth, now this upcoming part is very, very important to understand here. Now that comes with the computers and the cameras, of course, where it's talking about in Revelation 4:6, about these four ones and having being full of eyes. Okay, that comes with the computers and the cameras. They can see you from the sky. They can see you through through your phones. They can see you through your television sets. They have eyes everywhere that they can see. And of course, we know that technology did not come through until after started in 1934, but it's progressed to this day here, where, each day you can see there's much more that's coming forth in technology. Okay? Now in verse 18, Pastor says, here's the Lamb, speaking of Yahshua, now in Revelation 6, opening these seals that have been all sealed up from the time of Daniel until the time when he saw those two witnesses teaching. And we know and understand in the book of Revelation that this is the writings of the Apostle Yochanan, who was inspired to write these things in the same way, to bring forth this writing for us in the last days to bring forth to the world. Okay? So continuing on there, where it says, opening these seals that have been all sealed up from the time of Daniel until the time when he saw those two witnesses teaching. All of this was written for this time period. And look at how Pastor is putting the emphasis on this time period. It's this time period, this work. The first will be last and the last will be first in bringing forth Yahweh's will. Okay? Then put together in a book called the Book of Yahweh. It's called the Book of Yahweh in Isaiah 16:33. Okay, 16:31. No, that's not right. Isaiah 34:16. Okay, come on now. I'm testing you out here. And then it was mentioned again in Acts by who? By Stephen. The deacon Stephen. Remember, he mentioned the same thing. Remember what he called it there. Well, you will next week, right? You'll know next week. And he's always, Pastor's encouraging us, trying to get us to continually think and look forward and study and show ourselves approved. Okay, so Pastor gives us an actual lesson there. He says, you'll know it next week. Read Acts 7 so you'll remember. The Book of Yahweh. Okay, let's, for time's sake, let's go over to the next page. In verse 26. Now, Pastor, through this, as we continue on and as we're coming to, he's showing this work, the work of the Lamb and Pastor, the branch. Okay? And in verse 26, Pastor says, the Lamb and the seals, he's opening them up. And in Hebrews 10:21 shows that the high priest is the Lamb. Okay? He opens the seals. He teaches the laws as it is shown in Hebrews 10:16. In Revelation 11, if you switch over there, it shows you who Yahshua gives these seals to. And of course, that's the two witnesses. If you got your Book of Yahweh, let's turn over and read that real quick. In Revelation 11, and refresh our mind now on those 2 or 3 verses. Okay? In Revelation 11, verse 1, and there was given me, and of course it's speaking to a pastor, and there was given me a reed like a measuring rod, and of course we know this is the pen also for him to go ahead and write all of the prophecies to bring forth this work in the last days. And the Malach stood, saying, rise and measure the temple of Yahweh, and the altar and its confines, where they worship within. Okay, in verse 2, but the court which is outside the temple leave out, and measure it not, for it is given to the Gentiles. And the holy city they will tread underfoot, 3.5 years. And of course, it's talking about specifically about a function that was to take place, a duty, a responsibility by pastor to do this. And of course, this was done. We have the temple brochure showing all of that work. Okay? And in verse 3, and I will give to my 2 witnesses to perform their prophetic offices. And of course, this is talking about at Abel, and they will foretell events, showing that this commission of the 2 witnesses is to prophesy. Okay, no one else has been given that commission. No one else, no other work on this earth. Okay, about the 3.5 years, those cast about with darkness. Okay, and in verse 4, these are, as it were, the 2 olive trees, and as it were, the 2 lamps of the 7 lampstand, ministering for the Father in the earth. And of course, this is talking about Yahweh, and of course, Yahweh's work, which today is all being brought forth through the firstborn Son, Yeshua Messiah, working through inspiration with our great pastor and overseer, the great Khan Yisrayl Hawkins. Okay, so let's continue on. And of course, Pastor says in Revelation 11:3, and I will give to my 2 witnesses. Well, that was what Daniel saw in Daniel 12. Now drop down to where Pastor says, Yahweh says, here the Lamb is opening the seals, and they will be given to my 2 witnesses. You see that? They're giving to them to explain to the people, a way of teaching. Teaching, the House of Yahweh has that commission to teach the laws of Yahweh. We have the commission to learn it, and then, of course, become teachers of righteousness. Okay, let's turn, let's go ahead and turn to page 33. Let's see here. On page 33, let's pick up again at verse 43. Okay? Pastor says, well, they had it too back then, but they had people that kept the feast and the Sabbath days. And yes, Yahweh allowed them to show their cruelty and their evil by killing these people. We think about everything that has taken place, even here in the United States, in the last days with the Branch Davidian group and other groups that have had some part of knowledge where they knew that the feast days was something that needed to be observed, didn't have the whole work, didn't know the whole work, but that, and also that the Sabbath days had to be kept, they have stamped this out, the Roman Catholic Church and all of her agencies that are brought forth. Okay, so that they, let's see here, that kept the feast and the Sabbath days, and yes, Yahweh allowed them to show their cruelty and the evil by killing these people, wiping out righteousness from the earth. That's the Roman Catholic Church that the world follows today. It's hard to believe it, but it is. It's true. That is the deception that the world is under at this time. Most people that you may run across on the street have no idea, even if they're in any other type of religion, that they're actually following the teachings of the Roman Catholic Church. Even if they're Muslim or even atheists, they're following the teachings of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, Pastor goes on to say the whole world is being led into this mass slaughter to depopulate the earth of some 5 billion people. And of course, that's their agenda. They're being led into it. It's given to them right here. It's no accident. And part of it is Zika virus. Part of it comes from over 30,000 other viruses that are spread throughout the world. Everybody in the world is sick today. Everybody's minds are confused. That's what Yahweh says. And we know this, and we know it and understand it because it's even in the firmament. It's in the earth beneath and the air that we breathe. All of this sickness and disease is bringing down the strength of the earth. Okay? And in Psalm 91, of course, Now Pastor's going to reveal to us where we need to go. Okay? In Psalm 91, verse 1 here, he who dwells in the secret place of the Most High will abide under the shadow. Those who dwell in this shadow, they're going to see. They don't have to be afraid. And that's something that we all have to keep in mind. There's no reason to fear because Yahweh is in total and complete control. Exactly. Yahweh is in total control. You know, nothing takes place. And if we would get that set in our minds, that nothing takes place that's outside of Yahweh's will, even if it doesn't seem to be pleasant to us at the time, you know, it's for a reason. It's a lesson, believe me. You know, we all need to understand that Yahweh is in total control. Okay, in verse 45, Pastor says, verse 5 says, you will not be afraid of the terror of night, nor of the arrow, all speaking of these wars that are being brought forth, that is the wars that flies by day, nor of the pestilence that is coming about from this. That is deception that walks in the deception. These viruses are created where they make out like they're trying to find a cure or a vaccine that will cure something, and then later on you find out how many diseases you got from that vaccine. Now, the last scripture I want to cover is in verse 57. If you look on page 35, and we're going to end on this note, Pastor says, and this is what Yahweh is allowing to show them what they're turning to, how bad men can be, just how evil man can be. And that's what we're looking at right now. We're seeing how evil man can be through sin and everything that is being brought forth in this world. And if everyone would please stand, I'm going to go ahead and I have the great honor and pleasure to turn the podium over to our great Kahan, the great Michael Hawkins.
Shalom. Please be seated. You always have to remember what the great Kahan said. Always trust in Yahweh. Okay? Can't go wrong that way. All right, we need to, let's see, he stopped. Let's do a real fast thing here. The next thing jumps into here, like in Revelations 9, talks about the seventh Malach sounded in verse 53 here. I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before Yahweh, saying, till the last Malach, which had the trumpet, loose the four messengers that are bound for the great river Euphrates. And of course, remember, that was done. He loosed them. And of course, after that point is when history shows that, you know, peace was taken from the earth, just exactly the way the prophecies have said. And in verse 18, he talks about by these three the men are killed by the fire, by smoke, by brimstone, issued out of their mouths. Of course, they have yet to see that, but the prophecy speaks of it. You can believe Yahweh in what he says. And then verse 20 talks about how the rest of the men were not killed by those plagues. They still wouldn't repent. You know, you just can't get these people to repent. Then it goes into about the Zika virus, how it spreads, and how dangerous that was and is, because, you know, none of these things are over. Just because you don't hear about something doesn't mean that it's just complete, that it's going away with. You know, it's just that it kind of like goes into hiding for a while, and then later on it'll come back out. And even worse later on, you know. So what they practice, it says in verse 78 here, is this. It's a religion that they practice. It's a religion of God worship, like Christmas or Halloween or Easter. All of these are religion. And they, of course, they don't classify it by their laws, you know. They pass the laws and they put their laws into action. But they won't pass this by their laws as a religion, even though it's a way of life, and it is religion. It's what they believe in, right? So it's their religion. It's the way that they worship the gods. So that's the reason why he says that they can get into all of the schools. They pass the laws defining it so that they say No, this isn't a religion. This is not scripture teaching. We've got to keep religion separate from the state. But these holidays are not religion, even though they're worship. They're God worship. So yes, they are. But it shows the confusion in their laws. And of course, they've got the Supreme Court set up to do their bidding as well. So let's jump down to here, verse 81. Now let's see. This was in Leviticus 18 and verse 20. He said, "Moreover, you shall not have relations with your neighbor's wife to defile her along with her." Now notice, defile means you're putting something in your body here that would cause a sickness or a disease where you become abominable. And you can pass that, which we now call viruses, the STDs, like the Zika virus. But notice defile. Defile means to profane, and especially to profane Yahweh's name. Okay? And the way you profane Yahweh's name is, remember, you were made into the image and likeness of Yahweh. That's what we're supposed to become as, Yahweh Himself. And so if you go against that, then you profane His name, because you're no longer being made into the image of Yahweh. You're making yourself into the image of a God. And as it says here, this defiles a person, because every man that a woman has relations with receives part of his DNA. And even that DNA can go up into his brain and lodge in her brain. It stays in her brain. She carries this around. Of course, you can see the reason why Yahweh says that the two shall become as one. Even a man joined to a harlot becomes one with the harlot, because of that reason. And science one day will understand these things. They're starting to comprehend these things. But, this is written in the scriptures years and years ago for people to understand. Okay, so don't defile yourself along with her. Okay, so in verse 83 it says, "And defile yourself along with it. Neither shall you have any woman present herself to have relation with an animal." It's confusion, it's perversion. And notice this word confusion, because it says it's confusion and perversion. The passage says this is mental. It's mental retardation is what it causes, mental illness. That's why you see people killing people and shooting people. And they admit that these people are mentally ill that do all of these things. And the thing is that the mind can snap at any time, But it's being conditioned to do that by the lifestyle that these people lead. And so when the right time comes and the right conditions are met, the people's minds snap. President Trump has said he's going to put a ban on transgenders from serving in the military. Well, that's the wisest thing the man could do, isn't it? Because think of the confusion that's in that person's mind that wants to be a transgender. They're totally confused in their mind. They can't even think straight to know what they are, and then they want to change themselves in such a manner. So it doesn't make any sense at all. So you can see that if they think that in their lifestyle, how would they be? This person's supposed to be, fighting in your army. So you can see the logical sense in it. Of course, he's going to catch a lot of flack, and is because of that. It's so deplorable what he has done, they say. Okay, verse 87 here, he says, in 1 Corinthians 6, we see the apostles. And this was the apostle Shaul. Remember what we read about in Leviticus there. He says, these are the laws that he gives that will guide mankind. But of course, they refused it. So Yahweh said, well, then let them refuse it. They'll be sealed. I'll just let them seal them. And, you won't hear anything about it for 1,500 years. And that's exactly what he did. He sealed the laws. He put away his scriptures, his words, and said they didn't want to live by the word. He took it away from them. He just simply removed it from them. And throughout that time, and a lot of that time he goes through, talk about the dark ages and so forth, and they didn't have the book of Yahweh. They didn't have the words of Yahweh at all with them. So they had no way to live righteously. And that was a horrible time, too. But he says, we're in the generation right now, that this great generation that Yeshua said to watch for, because this is going to be it. This is it. This is when mankind, that is sinful mankind, will wipe himself out. And this is what Yahweh has allowed the world to do in order to prove what sin brings. And he's proven this to heaven and earth. So, this is not the only planet in the universe that Yahweh sees falling and destroying itself with his inhabitants of it, who are practicing sin, because the gods are the ones that Yahweh allowed to come to earth to begin with. And these beings from outer space, they brought the earth to destruction using fleshly beings that they had the power to use, to influence and to teach and so forth. Well, what did they create? The oil supply. He says, wow, what a joke, because remember, hurt not the oil and the wine. That is what the major thing that they go after. He said, well, anyway, they created flesh-tearing cruelty, too. Why is it that you like the arenas so well in Rome? Why is that? Where did they get that? Well, remember the gods. Remember what the gods practice? Yeshua said to them, Satan is your teacher, and whatever she says you're going to do, and you will do it. Well, the gods, it shows you right there that Satan was a teacher. So the gods taught mankind, influenced mankind, and taught them how to live. And that's how they got all of these abominable things in their lives. Adam and Eve wasn't that way when they were created, right? But it wasn't until the gods and Satan was able to influence them, and then this began to creep into mankind, and those who desired to go that route went that way, and those who desired to follow Yahweh followed Yahweh and kept his laws, as Abel did. He said, well, the desire is in their mind, and it was as it was in the gods' minds that created the dinosaurs, because they created those things for their own pleasure, remember. For their own pleasure, they made those things. And they were just like video games are today, to go in and tear and war and so forth. There was nothing beneficial for them, that was assured. So Yahweh had to wipe the whole thing out. Okay, jump down to the bottom of the page, verse 92. The reason we're not getting it in the Catholic Church, the Vatican, is that the Vatican has control over these nations. They have the people working inside, so they have the Supreme Court. That's the majority of Catholics, and they do what the Pope tells them to do. They're the ones that pass the top laws for the nation, or any laws for the nation. And before, what he was talking about before that was about human rights. President Obama said we need human rights. And he said, yeah, we do. We have to have that right, but we don't have the right. We don't have the right to teach these things in the churches, and in the schools. It's against the law, but yet they'll stand up for their filth. But the Supreme Court and the ones Catholics who they put into office are already. Now, this is what the prophet Daniel said. He says, I looked and it amazed me. He says, it amazed Daniel at the amount of laws that this beastly system was passing. And the United States now is part of that beastly system, one of the four, the quartet, but also before that, the division of the nation, which this beastly system the Roman Empire, the great Roman Empire had, when the Queen sent Columbus here to the United States after it was so-called discovered, he brought an army and he went out killing. And that's what they did. They went out to take over the land, to take over this area, this newly discovered, quote-unquote, land, okay? And they went out. He said anyone who wasn't a Catholic, they would kill them and wipe them out as fast as they could, because they knew that they were going to settle this land and take possession of it. And so when the missionaries, when the ships came over here, they always had priests on those ships, and they came, and this was the missionaries. And of course, they would set up build churches, and they would go out, and you had all these heathens, all these pagans, all these Indians out there, They were heathen and pagans, and they just had to convert them to the Catholic Church. And if they didn't, of course, they killed them. But if they would convert, then they would have them as their servants, and then so therefore they could fill up the churches, and then they could say, well, America is now Christian land. But Yahweh saw to it that there were enough people in the government to sway it enough to get the right of freedom of speech. Because without freedom of speech, we couldn't do a job that we have to do. So freedom of speech. Now that came down to us. He says, and Yahweh did that for the reason because the United States is the only place that this word can go out. And that's why the United States is the only place, it's the chief of the nations, it's the only place that the house of Yahweh could possibly be. Okay? Because it has to be free to be able to speak the word, the message, and present the the confusion and the correction of the sin and so forth. And that couldn't be done at any other place in the whole world. We have freedom of speech. So no one ever noticed that it looked so great to them. He says, oh yes, we can't mix church and state, but we can give these rights here, like freedom of speech, and we'll just wipe them out if they say the wrong thing. Okay? But remember, it is protected by the Constitution, and at least that's still held up by the government. And also they just passed a law too, remember, that will protect any preachers and so forth that speak about certain things. Now 1 Corinthians 6 verse 9, he says, do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of Yahweh? Okay? In verse 96, he says, well, the Catholic Church, the Vatican, he says, they're taking away the rights to choose righteousness. And they're saying, no, you come to our school, and we're going to teach you. We're going to teach you, okay? Because, it says, do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of Yahweh? Well, you don't have the right to go out and to say that, as far as enforce it in the schools and so forth, and to teach the people in the schools where they should be taught in the schools, right? That's where they send their children to go off. But the Catholic Church, of course, says, well, you have rights to choose, but you can't go to school and teach these things. But come to our schools and we'll teach you. He says, we're going to teach you our way, okay? As of 2011, the Catholic Church operates the world's largest non-governmental school system. And in 2016, that's just last year, it supported 43,800 secondary schools and 95,200 primary schools. Okay? And the Catholic schools, they participate in the evangelizing missions of the church, and of course they integrate the religious education as the core subject within the curriculum. I remember, I went to Catholic school for the first 8 years, and I remember, it did force a pass the public school system, because the Catholics, they do have the best teachings and so forth. That's why they have all of these colleges and stuff, and that people go to for the higher education stuff, is because their best teachers are there, because they stress that. But at the same time they're doing that, they're also stressing the curriculum, because it was, I remember my brothers, as a Catholic, you have to go to, you have to receive this doctrine, so you have to go to catechism classes. Well, since me and my younger brother, since we went to Catholic school, well, we got religion taught every day and stuff. So come Saturday, when my brothers and sisters had to go off to the catechism classes, well, we could stay home and watch the cartoons on Saturday morning, So we were all joyful and excited about that, But the thing is every day you were taught catechism classes. You had your religion classes and you had the book. And it's the same old thing, like you said, you had the questions and answers in there. And the one in there about how can God be three people, at the same time and all be equal? Well, it's a very simple answer. He's a mystery. And that's all the answer you'll ever get. It's a mystery, my son. It's a mystery, And so they can never, and they never will try and understand it. In fact, they'll shut you down if you try and ask any questions and so forth. But this school system that they have set up in the United States, the Catholic schools is the largest non-public school system in the United States of America. And catechisms of schools in the United States was first established in the 19th century upon the arrival of the English immigrants. When people really started flowing in the 1800s from Europe there, well, Catholic schools were set up, and of course, we see that it's very critical in developing the American culture, okay? Very, very critical in developing the American culture, because they started early. When they came to the land, they knew they were going to take it over. It was going to be their land. All right, in verse 98, he says, so they're saying on the one hand, well, you got rights, and on the other hand, no, you don't have any rights. So they're contradicting, their own laws are contradicting themselves. But of course, the laws of Yahweh don't contradict. The laws of Yahweh are perfect. The laws of Yahweh are just and righteous. Look up at verse 99. He says, well, Yahweh has seen to it that in his house in these last days that they have the right of freedom of speech to tell you your rights. Okay? And so we have to have that freedom. We have to have freedom of speech. It had to be, the House of Yahweh had to be established in a place where you could have that. Otherwise, there's no possible way that you could get it done by spreading the message. He says, jump down to verse 101 there. He says, don't deceive yourselves, neither fornicators nor God worshippers are going to enter into the kingdom of Yahweh. Okay? No adulterers or men who commit sexual perversion with boys or men who do it with others and so forth. But the house of Yahweh is prophesied to teach Yahweh's way, and it's established in these last days, and it will teach Yahweh's way. You know, we're prophesied to do that, and we're going to do it. You know, Yahweh's in complete control. And the scripture tells you, the prophet Isaiah said, whatever goes forth out of the mouth of Yahweh, it won't return back to Yahweh void. It's going to accomplish the things that it set out to do. Okay? And it's going to be done. So you can believe these prophecies, that it says that we're going to teach Yahweh's way. That's what we're doing. When it says in Isaiah that eventually the nations will begin to flow to the house of Yahweh, you can believe that. That's not a lie. That is honest truth. You just have to believe what Yahweh has written through his prophets. Well, the Vatican's job is following Satan. That's the same thing that you see in Genesis 3:5. Remember, well, has Yahweh really said that, Eve? You know? Well, that's no fun. You know, let's go the other way. Let's be like the gods. Okay, and that's exactly what the Vatican's bringing forth today. It's the same thing. It's the same teaching that was brought forth in the garden. Now notice here in verse 107. Now notice in Romans 1:16 that this was a book that the apostle Shaul actually wrote to the people in Rome. Okay, these were people in captivity who were carried away beyond Babylon, beyond Damascus, and beyond Babylon. And the apostle Shaul was a Roman soldier whom Yeshua appeared to and said, I want you to come and do my work. Shaul was a Roman soldier. You know, how do we know that? Well, you know, a few simple scriptures will prove this and show it. In Romans 9, not Romans 9, 1, Acts. Totally different book. In Acts 9, verse 1, it says, Then Shaul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of Yeshua, went to the high priest. Okay? And he asked him for letters of the synagogues in Damascus, so that if they found any along that way, whether they were men or women, that they might bring them bound to Jerusalem. And of course, so this was the Crusades, okay? But notice, Shaul went to the high priest, okay? He went to the high priest. And we know that in the time of... so he went to get his orders from the high priest. Now, why in the world would he go to the high priest? You know, if the Romans were the mighty Romans, you know, and you had all the government set up and so forth, and then you had these Jews who were set up, who they were supposed to be ruling over, you know. Who were these little scrawny Jews coming up to us and telling us anything, you know? Well, we're a mighty Roman, right? And that's the way that history looks upon it and stuff. They don't really realize. But when you look at... can you see that? I can't. Okay. When you see this right here in Matthew, what? Oh, right there? Oh, you got it. Okay, cool. Okay, now, when you see here, it says, this is Matthew 28, verse 11. This is when Yeshua was in the grave. It says, Now while they were on their way, behold, some of the guard of the soldiers went into the city, and they reported to the chief priests all the things that were done. Now remember, they were at the grave. Yeshua was resurrected. The stone rolled back, freaked him out, and he took off wondering what in the world was going on. So here's these guards that ran to the chief priests. Now, if the priests, if these were just these Jews who the Romans were supposed to be just ruling over, why in the world would a Roman soldier go to the chief priests of the Jews? You know, if they didn't have power and authority, right? So notice what he says here. because this word guard here actually means a Roman sentry, okay? And then he says, when they assembled with the elders, they took counsel, and this was a large amount of money was given to the soldiers, because the word elders there, it's a term or a rank of office. It's the members of the great council of the Sanhedrin, okay? So they got the Sanhedrin together. They decided to give a large amount of money to the soldiers. Now that word soldier means a common warrior or a soldier. It's from number 4756. It's an army, okay? It's an army. It's a soldier that serves in the army. So they told the people, well, just tell them, look, the disciples came and stole them away by night. And if this reaches the governor's ears, we will convince him and keep you out of trouble. Now, can you imagine that? Here's a Jew, right? Here's just a Jew who these mighty Romans are over with, and yet they're going to go to the governor, and they're going to convince him that these soldiers, are telling the truth. How could they do that if they didn't have power and authority over the armies? You see what I'm saying? And the same word, of course, is used here in Genesis 27. This is right before that when he says, the next day the chief priests and the Pharisees came to Pilate, and Pilate said, we remember how they told Pilate, his ruler, we remember how the deceiver, when he was still alive, said after 3 days he would be raised up. Therefore command the scepter to be made secure. That word command, notice, it means to command or to order. Now they ordered Pilate. They told Pilate, we need to set up some guards here, because go out and say, look, the disciples might come and steal him away, so we need to make sure we set up a guard and watch his body for those first 3 days. So Pilate said, well, you have a guard of soldiers. Go your way and make it secure as you can. And when they went, they secured the sepulchre by sealing the stone and setting up a watch. Okay? So you can see that if they didn't have power and authority over the army, just as the prophet Daniel said that they would, then how could they accomplish these things, But people read right over this stuff and don't even really comprehend what it really says, what it's talking about. So Shaul was a Roman soldier, and of course he got his orders from the priest, and he went out and he did his damage and so forth. Then Yeshua, of course, called him. Now, and then it says, that's why we have to believe all that the prophets have spoken, because it's all there. It tells us exactly what's there. Let's see, let's jump down to Romans chapter 1, let's go to verse 113. For in this message is the righteousness of Yahweh revealed. Okay, in this message of the kingdom, the righteousness of Yahweh is revealed, originating from the faith and leading to the faith. Here a little and there a little, right? Just as the prophets have spoken. But notice it says, as it is written. Pastor says, did you get those words? Not brought down mouth by mouth, but as it is written. Shaul understood that. Okay? In other words, as it was written by the prophets, written word, not the oral law, like the Jews say that they have. They have the written law and they have the oral law. They're supposed to be written. Now you can imagine 6,000 years later, somebody remember what Moshe was talking about. Can you believe that? But this is what they want you to believe. That this kind of stuff could be remembered and passed on. It's just absolutely foolishness. Okay, jump over to next page here. Verse 116, verse 21, because that when they knew Yahweh, they didn't glorify him as the Father, that is, as their teacher. This is the one that they should be following. This is the one they should be obeying. But what did they do? They became idolaters. They became God worshipers. In Genesis 3:5, remember? Worship the gods and be evil like the gods. And so, because of that, the reasoning of their senseless minds was darkened. It wasn't made of light. It wasn't the laws of Yahweh that was in their mind, but their minds and thinking became darkened, as it says. Okay? And then they professed themselves to be wise, but of course they became fools, because Yeshua said, you're a fool if you don't believe all that the prophets have spoken. Well, they didn't believe all the prophets had spoken, so therefore they remained in their foolishness, in their ignorance of not knowing Yahweh's word. Look at verse 123 here. They changed the word of Yahweh to the lies of the Lord, or the lords, the many lords. That's as one of the apostles said, there are many lords and many gods, remember? So this is what they decided to do, was to make themselves up as gods. And so therefore, if they became a lord, then the people would worship them. But of course, you see the fact that all this was taught to them by the Queen of Heaven, and it didn't get them anywhere, except fall further and further away and bring more and more and more curses upon themselves. Okay, verse 126. Now Daniel 11:31, it says, and the army will stand on his part, that is, on the part of the religion that they own, because they own the army. All right, the Herodians owned the great army, and they took the three other religions with them. Remember them, plucked them up. They transplanted them over to Rome. The Herodians. Okay, the word Herod. Let me just show you this. The word Herod. The word Herod, the Herodians, okay? The Herodians had the armor, right? The word Herodians pertains to Herod. It's Greek which comes from the Greek word meaning hero. Now, a hero in classical mythology is a man born from a god and a mortal, especially one who had done service to mankind, okay? And then Webster says a hero means a mythological or legendary figure, often of divine descent. And synonyms mean God and idol, okay? So they make themselves into these heroes of gods and idols. And basically this is what they say Jesus. This is what Jesus is. Jesus is a hero. Jesus is a God and man, you know, is what they say. And, let me show you this. Because this is shown in the book. The book of Acts shows you a lot of stuff. This was Herod. Now, we're talking about Herod. Now, look at what occurred to Herod here, okay? This is in Acts 12, verse 20. It says, now Herod had been furiously angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon, and they had came to him in the united body, and having made Blastus the king's chamberlain their friend, they asked for peace because their country depended on the king for the food supply. On a set day, Herod arrayed himself in his royal robes, sat upon his throne, and made a speech to them. And the people gave a shout, saying, it is the voice of a God, and not of a man. And the Malach of Yahweh struck him instantly because he did not give glory to Yahweh, and he was eaten by worms and died. But the word of Yahweh grew and multiplied. So I guess he ate his last pork sausage for breakfast. Then you see over here, no, that's not it. Oh, over here. Yeah, I was in the right spot. Okay. This is when the Apostle Shaul and them, remember? They came preaching and stuff, and they, the snake bit them and so forth and all that kind of stuff. Well, they seen him, and they said, verse 11, when the people saw that Shaul had done, they lifted up their voices, saying the language of Laconia, the gods have come down to us in the likeness of men. And of course, they called them Zeus and Barnabas and so forth, So you can see that this is what is in their minds. In the world today, and this is why they have their gods. They still have their sports heroes and so forth, and their music heroes and all this kind of stuff. All this stuff is still in the people's minds. It's never changed at all. They still just confused today as there's ever been. Jump over to verse 140 here at the end. He said, what you're going to see develop is not peace. Okay, it's not going to be peace, even though they think that. He says, I can guarantee you they're going to see nuclear war. They're going to get to a point where they proclaim true peace, and the Vatican will think that they've got it under control, but not with their teachings. Their teachings teach just opposite against that. It doesn't teach peace. It teaches hatred. It teaches war. It teaches to make yourself up as a god. Okay? But when the Vatican will think that it has it under control, that's when everything's going to break loose. And we're seeing that in the news taking place now, as you see the setup. Verse 142, he says, now, there have been nations already destroyed because of this, and this is what has brought about the wars. Well, this depopulation planning now, we'll just wait and see how it develops, but Yahweh has shown us the outcome. He doesn't show us all the details, but he's got a lot more details that I want to bring out, he says. But one of the last things you're going to see is that 1 hour of nuclear burning. 1 hour of it. It's all going to be over in 1 hour. Because when it takes place, when that final war takes place, we couldn't last through it. And so Yahweh's going to be very merciful in the fact that he's going to give us that 1 hour to have it all taken care of, and then we can be redeemed. So praise Yahweh. And we'll be able to teach others. We'll be able to teach the nations, the world, that this is what Yahweh's way can bring you. But if you go Satan's way, you've seen the results with the war and so forth. May Yahweh bless you, man.